It's been a great day. There's been lots of great content, but we're really about, I think, to push in new directions. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Director of R&D of Jigsaw, a unit of Google, Yasmin Green. I wanted music for you.
No music. I'm ill.
Great. So Yasmin is one of the most fascinating people, I think, that I know. And she's just coming off the Today Show, where she spent time this morning. And we're lucky to have her here. So first of all, for people who don't know, tell us about Jigsaw. What is Jigsaw?
Jigsaw is the part of Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, that looks at geopolitical challenges. So we were set up 5 years ago by Eric Schmidt, the then CEO of Google, when he was traveling around the world and noticing that there was this cyber spillover wherever he went. You know, there was this technology component to every real-world conflict or geopolitical issue. So he prophetically decided to set up a team that would be dedicated to developing technology to help. And of course, today there are, is it 3 billion people online? The next 3 billion people who come online over the next decade are coming online in parts of the world which have less protections for human rights, less rule of law, more censorship. So we really have to start thinking about developing an internet for them. And that's the role for my group.
You've done a lot of interesting work, I think, to date on countervailing violent extremism, or countering violent extremism. Can you talk a little bit about that and the Redirect project?
Yeah, thanks. So one of our areas, we look at authoritarianism, different types of digital attack. One of the areas we look at is terrorism and violent extremism. And one of our projects came out of the last year's worth of research talking to ISIS defectors. I actually directed a research trip to Iraq where I spoke to dozens of former Arab and Kurdish defectors, so people who'd gone, trained as suicide bombers, and then fled the caliphate and could talk about the human experience and the role of technology within that, and really gave us ideas about how we could use Google's technology to prevent others falling prey to recruitment. And that essentially involved designing very sophisticated, targeted ads that identify individuals who are susceptible to ISIS's messaging, who are sympathetic, have some kind of positive sentiment towards ISIS. And it's interesting because most of us here have searched for ISIS or could search for ISIS, and we're not potential recruits. So the question we were asking in our interviews was, what distinguishes the online behavior of someone who's really sympathetic to an extremist group versus just the mainstream internet user who wants to find out more? And it turns out there are ways that you can distinguish between those audiences using keywords. So one of the girls that I spoke to who wanted to go at 13 to join the Islamic State, a Westerner.
Where was she from?
She was actually from Birmingham in the UK. And I was really excited to get a chance to speak with her to find out what could possibly possess a 13-year-old to want to go to join a terrorist group. And so I sat down and I said, tell me, what were you expecting? And she said, well, I thought I was going to go and live in the Islamic Disney World.
Right.
I was like, wow, how do you get that from the bloodshed and the sex slaves? And she said, I was just looking online at the stuff I like. I didn't look at the other stuff, I just looked at the stuff I like. And I thought, 13, so ignorant and so flawed. And then you realize that actually we all do that. We all go online and look for the stuff we like. Nobody, just in the same way in the physical world, I don't go to a party and think, that guy looks like a jerk, I'm going to go and chat to him all night. No, we're all looking for stuff that reinforces what we believe. So.
Right.
Anyway, so I said, when did you first hear about the internet? And she said, first hear about ISIS. And she said, on the BBC. And I said, I'm British and I love the BBC. So I said, oh, really? Tell me more about that. And she said, well, you can't trust anything the BBC says. So whatever they were saying about ISIS, I thought was the opposite.
Wow.
And wow, right? So it's interesting. If you look at the online search behavior of that slice of ISIS's audience that are susceptible to their messaging, you find that they want ISIS-produced content. They don't want BBC or CNN or like things that we'd be satisfied with as information sources. They look at ISIS's production houses, so Furqan, Hayat, Al-Ittisam. So you can start to, so we basically built a repository of thousands of keywords that help us identify individuals who are interested in ISIS. Design ads that were not moralistic. They were really genuinely trying to answer the questions that ISIS is posing around religious legitimacy, around their effectiveness as a governing body, around their military prowess. And we directed them to YouTube videos that counter the arguments that ISIS makes.
So how do you judge efficacy there? How do you know if it works?
Right, so we ran an 8-week pilot. The pilot reached 320,000
wow.
at-risk individuals in Arabic and English, which is a lot. And had really high click-through rates, so people were engaging with the ads. But we've all had that experience of clicking on landing on a YouTube video and pressing back because it wasn't quite what we wanted. And these are people that we think have some kind of positive sentiment towards ISIS, and this is content that is debunking ISIS's messaging. So how much of that did they watch? A total of 500,000 minutes
wow.
in 8 weeks, which is the equivalent of you sitting down at your laptop without a break for an entire year and watching this content.
Wow, that's very cool. Very satisfying.
That's what I was talking about this morning.
So that's an interesting thing to think about, because there it's a very sort of clear-cut case. Keep these young people, these vulnerable people, being exploited by ISIS. When we talk about sort of online harassment, you start to get into issues of free speech versus hate speech. Maybe it fits within the terms of service. Dell was just talking about how they use their terms of service as a tool to take off bad actors. But what if they're, talk to us about how you're thinking about that balance between online censorship and then dealing with sort of this hate speech, and then we can talk about AI.
Yeah, that's a real tension. When we started our group 5 years ago, we expressed this moonshot, which is Google's way of saying like a really audacious 10-year goal. And it was to end repressive censorship within a decade. And we were thinking about the Irans and Iranian, the countries that we all know are so repressive. And we thought of blocking websites. Really quick sidebar about what it means that Iran blocks websites. There are many countries that are governed under Islamic law, or regions that are governed under Islamic law, where being a homosexual is a sin. And when it's the government running the country that's governing it under Sharia, it's a crime. But in Iran, it's not just a sin and a crime, it's actually a myth to be homosexual.
Really?
Because the government blocks any websites that have messaging around, especially positive messaging around LGBT issues. Huh. And the propaganda that they spread is that if you're a man who loves a man, you must be a trans woman.
Right.
And it's so persistent, this messaging, that there are people in Iran who are gay and don't know that that's a concept. And they actually have, because the government gives free sex reassignment surgery, they actually have surgery and change their sex because of government propaganda and censorship. So, which is mind-blowing. So censorship is a really big issue, but to answer your question, Jonathan, over the last year or so, we've expanded our definition of censorship to include online intimidation, because it causes individuals to self-censor, and it causes publishers to self-censor. The number of websites that have just taken just disabled comments because they can't keep up with the volume and the toxicity. It's certainly a censorship challenge. So
it's interesting, because that was, of course, the genesis for our own analysis on cyber hate, was the self-censorship we heard from journalists, not like Jonathan or Yair, who were both very bold and courageous, but others who were targeted, which then is probably a good segue to talk about this issue of online harassment and Project Conversation. And we're starting a collaboration so we can be helpful to Google in this effort and work together. But maybe you, ADL that is, maybe you could lay out what it is.
Yeah, the challenge with online intimidation, hate, and harassment is that there's so much content that's created. We saw some of those stats from Dell. And when it's flagged, it needs to be reviewed. And it needs to be reviewed by humans, because humans understand context. And you'll hear the word context a lot when we talk about the need to put thought and accuracy into reviews. Until recently, it was, really until right now, it's been true that we needed to rely on humans to do the reviews. So we couldn't necessarily get to all the content or get to it as fast as we'd like. But what's really promising, and I hope like some ray of light and promise for us at the end of the day, is advances in machine learning to understand exactly context. So it used to be the case that with automation, you would feed the machine rules, and then it could apply those rules in a kind of programmatic way. With machine learning and AI, you can now train algorithms on patterns so that they start to understand context. And actually, a pretty accessible example of this is we trained a bunch of algorithms on YouTube data of cats. And we didn't say a cat has pointed ears and whiskers and is furry. We didn't give it rules. We just gave it examples of cats and examples of non-cats. And then with incredibly high accuracy, the machines could then tell you whether a new video was a cat or not. Really cool. Kind of like, I mean, we don't fully know exactly how it works because we didn't give it the rule.
Right.
But it's a really like, profound advance in terms of the ability to understand speech in natural language programming. And with deep learning advances, we can teach the machines much faster. So the project that we've been working on, Conversation AI, for the last year is training algorithms with the goal of detecting hate and harassment. So building data sets that have labeled examples of hate and harassment, which is actually its own problem. That's not trivial to do. It doesn't exist already. Training the algorithms so that they can understand what patterns of hate and harassment are. And just to give you an example of the context point, as a techie, this is an example that I hold dear. Take the example of the word nerd. You know, like you'll hear at Google, "Yo, nerds, you want to go and watch the latest Star Wars movie?" Right? That's fine, and that's an endearing application of it. You'll also hear stories from the nerds at our work of like ways that the word nerd is used as an insult in a derogatory way. You know, like, you're such a nerd, get lost. Machines can understand that nerd in each of those contexts means something different because they're trained on patterns, on whole sentences, even sometimes on paragraphs. So it's a really exciting potential here. It's at the research phases right now for us to automate and better deal with the volume of hate and harassment that's online. And maybe eventually down the line, even let communities set the tone themselves. You know, like there isn't a universal truth for what people want.
So would you imagine this would exist sort of in an open data kind of way that people could Twitter or Meetup or other kind of, or Yik Yak or other sort of applications could plug into it? Is that how it would work?
Yeah, exactly. We're looking actually for partners. We're already partnering with the New York Times, who has 17 million tagged comments, which is an incredible data set. The New York Times is like uniquely successful at curating comments on its website. It has 14 people working full-time on comment curation, and it can still only enable comments on 10% of its articles.
Wow. Because
it's such a difficult job to do. Most other websites just, they say, the conversation can happen elsewhere. It doesn't have to happen on our platform. But we're looking for more partners. We're also partnering with Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia probably has a lot to teach about the way that they curate conversation in sort of an editorial frame that seem, bereft of harassment, right?
Seem is the proper word there. We all cherish Wikipedia as this incredible free online live resource. It turns out that the moderation challenge is quite acute in terms of personal attacks. You think about the example of a page where there's the content expert who's responsible for moderating and doesn't get paid. And then you think about, let's say, for example, a state-sponsored moderator who's, for example, like spreading Russia's worldview of, where does Crimea stand? Like, do the Crimean people feel Russian? Are they happy to be annexed by Russia?
Right.
And eventually, if they're so persistent and state-sponsored and harassing, then the like unbiased moderator who had been doing this for no money is going to relent. So there's a really big problem with personal attacks, and that's something that we're trying to help Wikipedia defend against.
Interesting. So I'm thinking, this week Google and Facebook announced removing the fake news from their website, or maybe. Yeah,
a new policy to stop. To not allow fake news sites to
So is that something as well that, AI could help with that, right? To allow a user to understand what's real versus what's sort of inauthentic?
Yeah, there's a product that we just announced. So I kind of think about this, like, okay, there's a challenge online in terms of toxicity. What are all the resources that we have to help us address the challenge. And one is conversations. It's like an incredible resource. How can we make conversations more inclusive and more diverse and have more of them in more places? The other one is, how do we leverage fact-checking organizations to hold the news to account? So one of the recent announcements was that Google News will now promote fact-checking articles. So things like PolitiFact and factcheck.org, Washington Post, articles that are dedicated to fact-checking, even if they might not be popular, they'll promote them to the top next to the article to help people who really want to figure out the truth consume both sources.
Well, so we see, through our Center on Extremism, certainly a lot of issues with the public platforms, but we also see issues with the private sort of web, if you will, like Reddit and 4chan and 8chan. How many of you were on a 8chan today? That's a good thing. So maybe you could describe, how many of you are familiar with 4chan? Oh, a few of you, okay, I see, I gotcha. Maybe you could explain what these are for people?
Yeah. I mean, they're chat forums where individual moderators can curate around any subject. And I really think about, we had a conversation about Twitter before, and I really applaud Dell for being here. That's amazing, and for the work that they're doing, the product changes, features that they're announcing. But Twitter's just one part of the internet, and it might be where some of this is most visible to us. But I think about a supply chain to hate and harassment, and it's different depending by the actor. So if you look at the Islamic State, there are some peer-to-peer chat, mobile chat rooms where they organize, they have a hashtag brigade to coordinate which hashtags they're going to raid to promote. If you look at the Chinese government, you'll see a lot of organization on military fora before they spread elsewhere. Of course, there are examples of kind of Gamergate stuff on Reddit. So there are places where people organize their activity, kind of like command and control centers, and then there is where you see it unleashed. So
do you think the AI technology have any application to the, oftentimes if you think about a business, you want to move down the supply chain, right? Not just at the retail end, but go wholesale and manufacture to kind of like address a problem. Could you envision moving down that value chain yourself?
Yeah, definitely. The way that we're thinking about this is, let's advance the research, let's get the models in a place where they have a really high rate of accuracy, where they're not, where they're making sure that the types of use cases that we've discussed around anti-Semitism are accounted for, anti-feminist, anti-black, anti-Muslim. Let's get them in a really good place, and let's have all of the ecosystem, all the other platforms feed in their data and then deploy them.
So I'll be candid and admit that I don't really understand how Alphabet is truly working, organized, et cetera. I don't really get beyond sort of Google and maybe YouTube, what's going on with all the other letters. So in terms of Jigsaw, what's your business model? Like, how do you make money, or how does that work?
We don't make money.
You don't?
We don't make money.
So it's just considered an R&D unit?
Yeah, the idea is, Google is a technology company that was founded by engineers and is run by a tech guy, and their philosophy has always been, and I've been at the company for a decade, and this has been like this the entire time, it was like, take care of the user and the rest follows. Whatever you think about the state of the internet now, if we don't act on some of these issues, it is only going to get worse. Our job is to prevent that from happening.
Got it. Super cool.
So
business. I guess, so talk about how you envision ADL helping sort of conversation AI and Jigsaw more generally.
Well, we had a really good conversation, Jonathan. It was your example, so I wonder if you want to raise it. But we were talking about how targeted hate is very nuanced. At the same, it matters who it's coming from and who it's targeted at. I wonder if you want to give the example of.
Which example? Which one? Oh yeah, right. That's a good one. So one of the delights of being the CEO of ADL is you're a little bit in the public eye, and you have lots of admiring fans, much like Jonathan and Yair. And so I am often tweeted things like lovely photos of ovens and lampshades and bars of soap. Now, as we were talking about it in Yasmin's office a few weeks ago, it's one thing if I'm walking into a Best Buy and I get an automatic message, from Maytag right, or GE, that there's a sale on ovens, over in the appliance section of Best Buy. It's another thing when I get an email from Shlomo Schleckelstein, reichforever.com, that he wants to send me an oven for me and my family. So thinking about how do you put AI together so that it can interpret the difference and anticipate when one is intended to be very offensive and threatening and the other one's just intending to give me a 10% discount. So we're excited about the opportunity to share what we've learned over a very long period of time at ADL, the data that we've got about harassment in all its forms, and of course in particular in anti-Semitism with Jigsaw, to make their conversation AI even more successful, which I think, as Yasmin said, will benefit really all of us. And I really love working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.